The engine roared, a guttural scream that drowned out the chaos in my head. I gripped the steering wheel of my beat-up Ford pickup, the one Dad left me, and tore down Highway 101, the Pacific Ocean glittering like a taunt on my left. I was running from something, myself, maybe, but I didn't expect to crash into him. My name's Caleb Monroe, 24, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart that's been stuck in neutral for too long. I grew up in Havens Cove, a sleepy coastal town in Oregon where everybody knows your name and your secrets. Tonight, I wasn't Caleb the dutiful son or Caleb the guy who fixes your carburetor. I was just a man with a storm in his chest, driving to outrun the whispers in my head. Whispers that had grown louder since Mom's funeral 3 months ago. She'd been the only one who knew the real me, the me I hid behind oil changes and small talk. Now, she was gone, and I was unraveling. The diner's neon sign flickered up ahead, Marge's Place, a relic of the 50s with checkered floors and pie that could make you forgive the world. I didn't plan to stop. I was aiming for nowhere, just the open road and the hum of tires on asphalt. But then I saw him, standing under the diner's awning, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. He was tall, lean, with dark hair curling at the nape of his neck and eyes that caught the neon glow like they held secrets of their own. My foot eased off the gas. The truck slowed, almost like it knew something I didn't. I pulled into the gravel lot, my heart thudding louder than the engine. He glanced over, and for a split second, our eyes locked through the windshield. It was like the air got thinner, like the world tilted just enough to make me dizzy. I didn't know his name, but I knew I'd never seen him in Havens Cove before. This town didn't breed strangers, especially not ones who looked like they'd stepped out of a dream I wasn't brave enough to have. I cut the engine and stepped out, the cool September air hitting my face like a wake-up call. He was leaning against a motorcycle, a sleek black thing that looked as out of place as he did. His leather jacket was scuffed, his jeans worn, but there was something about him. Something alive, something raw. "You lost," I called out, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. He smiled, a slow, cautious curve of his lips. "Not lost, just passing through." His voice was warm, like honey over gravel, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "You? Something like that," I said, shoving my hands in my pockets to keep them from shaking. "Name's Caleb." "Elliot," he replied, and the way he said it made it sound like a confession. He pushed off the motorcycle, closing the distance between us. Up close, his eyes were a piercing blue, like the ocean on a day it wants to swallow you whole. "You always drive like you're chasing ghosts." I laughed, a sharp, surprised sound. "Only when the ghosts are winning." He tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve. "Well, Caleb, you look like you could use a coffee. Or something stronger." I didn't know why I followed him into Marge's. Maybe it was the way he said my name, like it mattered. Maybe it was the ache in my chest that felt a little less heavy when he looked at me. Inside, the diner smelled of fried onions and nostalgia. Marge herself, a woman with a perm and a heart of gold, gave me a knowing nod as we slid into a booth. The vinyl squeaked under us, and the jukebox played some old Springsteen tune about running and never looking back. Elliot ordered a black coffee. I got a Coke. We sat there, two strangers in a town that didn't take kindly to surprises, and talked. Not about anything big, not at first. He told me he was a photographer, drifting from town to town, chasing stories through his lens. I told him about the garage, about the way a wrench felt solid in my hand when nothing else did. But there was an undercurrent, a pull between us, like a tide dragging me out to sea. "You don't belong here," he said after a while, his voice soft but sure. "Not in this town. It's too small for you." I bristled, even though he was right. "It's home. Is it?" His eyes searched mine, and I felt exposed, like he could see the parts of me I'd spent years burying. The parts that didn't fit in Havens Cove, where men like me were supposed to marry girls like Sarah Jenkins and coach Little League, not dream of blue-eyed strangers who made their pulse race. I changed the subject, asking about the places he'd been. He talked about New Orleans at midnight, the deserts of Arizona, the way the light hit the Golden Gate Bridge at dawn. His words painted pictures, and I hung onto every one, greedy for a life I'd never dared to imagine. But when he asked about me, really asked, about what kept me up at night, I froze. How do you tell someone you're afraid of who you are? That you've spent your whole life pretending because it's safer than the truth? The diner emptied out, and Marge started wiping down the counter, her eyes flicking toward us with a mix of curiosity and something else, disapproval, maybe. Havens Cove wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. Not to people like me. Not to people like Elliot, if he was who I thought he was. You ever feel like you're running out of time? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elliot leaned forward, his hand brushing mine on the table. It was accidental, maybe, but it burned like a brand. Every day, he said. That's why I keep moving. If you stay still too long, the world catches up and tries to put you in a box. I wanted to ask what box he was running from, but the door jangled, and Tommy Hargrove walked in. Tommy, with his buzz cut and his high school football glory days, who'd called me freak in 10th grade when I didn't join the team. His eyes landed on us, on Elliot's hand near mine, and his lip curled. Monroe, he said, his voice dripping with something ugly. Didn't know you kept such colorful company. Elliot didn't flinch, but I felt the air shift, like a storm was brewing. We're just talking, Tommy, I said, my jaw tight. Sure you are. He smirked, grabbing a to-go coffee from Marge and sauntering out, but not before throwing a look that said he'd be talking about this later. In a town like this, gossip was a currency, and I'd just handed Tommy a fortune. Elliot watched him go, then turned back to me. Friend of yours? Not exactly. I stared at my Coke, the bubbles rising like my panic. You should know this place. It's not always friendly to people like me, he finished, his voice steady but sharp. Or to people like you? I couldn't answer. The truth was a weight I wasn't ready to carry, not out loud. But Elliot didn't push. He just sat there, his presence like a lighthouse in the fog, guiding me towards something I wasn't sure I could reach. When we left the diner, the night had deepened, the stars sharp above the ocean. Elliot walked me to my truck, and for a moment, we stood there, the world quiet except for the waves. Come with me, he said suddenly, his voice urgent. Just for a drive. See where the road takes us. I should have said no. I should have gone home to my empty house, to the life I'd always known. But I looked into his eyes, and I saw something I'd been searching for my whole life, a chance to be free. I nodded, and we climbed into my truck, the engine roaring back to life. As we pulled onto the highway, I didn't know where we were going. All I knew was that for the first time in years, I wasn't running away. I was running toward something, toward him. The highway stretched before us, a ribbon of black under the moonlight, and the truck's headlights carved a path through the dark. Elliot sat beside me, one arm resting on the open window, the wind tousling his hair. Every now and then, he'd glance at me, and I'd feel that pull again, like a current I couldn't fight. I didn't know what I was doing, driving into the night with a stranger who felt like anything but. All I knew was that for the first time in forever, I wasn't suffocating. We didn't talk much at first. The radio played low, some old country song about lost love, and I kept my eyes on the road, afraid that if I looked at him too long, I'd lose control of more than just the truck. But Elliot had a way of filling the silence without trying. He'd point out a constellation or hum along to the music, his voice soft but sure, like he'd lived 100 lives, and this was just one more adventure. Where are we going? I finally asked, my voice cutting through the hum of the engine. He grinned, a flash of teeth that made my chest ache. Does it matter? It should have. I was Caleb Monroe, the guy who fixed cars and paid his bills on time, who stayed in Havens Cove because it was safe, predictable. But tonight, with Elliot beside me, the rules I'd lived by felt like chains. Guess not, I said, and I meant it. He told me more about his life as we drove. He'd grown up in Chicago, in a house where his dad's temper was as constant as the city noise. He'd known he was gay since he was 13, but it wasn't until he was 18 that he told anyone. His dad didn't take it well, understatement of the century. Elliot left home with a backpack and a camera, and he'd been on the road ever since, capturing moments that made him feel alive. Every picture's a story, he said, his eyes distant. And every story's a piece of me. I wanted to ask what stories he was running from, what scars he carried under that leather jacket, but I didn't. Instead, I told him about Mom, about how she'd sit with me on the porch and talk about the stars, about how she'd known I was different and loved me anyway. She used to say I was like the ocean, I said, my voice thick. Always moving, even when it looks still. Elliot's hand found mine on the gear shift, a brief, electric touch. She sounds like she saw you. Really saw you. I nodded, my throat tight. She was the only one. We stopped at a lookout point, the ocean sprawling below us, waves crashing against the cliffs. The air was sharp with salt, and the moonlight painted everything silver. Elliot pulled a blanket from his bag, and we sat on the hood of the truck, our shoulders brushing. It was the closest I'd ever come to feeling whole. You ever think about leaving? He asked, his voice soft against the roar of the sea. Starting over somewhere new? All the time, I admitted. But this town, it's got roots in me. My dad's garage, my mom's memory. It's hard to walk away from that. He looked at me, his eyes searching. What's harder? Staying and pretending, or leaving and being yourself? The question hit like a punch. I'd spent years pretending, smiling at church picnics, dodging questions about why I wasn't married, ignoring the way my heart raced when I saw guys like Elliot. But sitting here, with the ocean as my witness, I couldn't lie. Pretending, I said. It's killing me. He didn't say anything, just leaned closer, his warmth seeping into me. For a moment, I thought he might kiss me, and my heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. But instead, he pulled out his camera and snapped a picture of the ocean, the flash bright against the dark. For the story, he said, his voice teasing but soft. We stayed there until the sky started to lighten, talking about everything and nothing. Music, dreams, the way the world felt too big and too small all at once. When we finally got back in the truck, I didn't want the night to end. But as we drove back toward Havens Cove, reality crept in. Tommy's smirk, the whispers that would spread like wildfire, the life I'd built on lies. I dropped Elliot off at the diner, where his motorcycle was still parked. He lingered by the truck, his hand on the doorframe. Come find me tomorrow, he said. I'm not leaving yet. I nodded, but as I drove home, doubt clawed at me. Havens Cove wasn't a place for people like us. I'd seen what happened to guys who didn't fit the mold. Whispers turned to shoves, and shoves turned to worse. But Elliot's voice, his touch, his belief that I could be more than this town. It was a spark in the dark, and I wasn't ready to let it go out. When I got home, the house was too quiet, Mom's absence a weight in every room. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time, I let myself imagine a life where I didn't have to hide. A life with Elliot, or at least with the courage he carried like a second skin. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, I dreamed of roads that led nowhere and everywhere, and a man with blue eyes who made me want to follow. Morning came too soon, the sun slicing through my curtains like a reminder of the world I couldn't escape. I woke with Elliot's name on my lips, his face burned into my mind. But Havens Cove was already awake, and with it, the gossip. By the time I got to the garage, Tommy Hargrove had done his work. Heard you were cozy with that drifter last night, my coworker Pete said, his tone half teasing, half sharp. People are talking, Caleb. Let him talk, I snapped, but my stomach twisted. I spent the morning under a Chevy, pretending the wrench in my hand could fix more than just cars. But every clank of metal echoed Elliot's question, What's harder, staying and pretending, or leaving and being yourself? I found him at the diner again that evening, his camera on the table, a plate of fries half-eaten. He looked up when I walked in, and his smile was like a lifeline. "Thought you might not show," he said, pushing the fries toward me. "Almost didn't," I admitted, sliding into the booth. "This town, it's got eyes everywhere." He leaned forward, his voice low. "Then let's give him something to see." My heart stuttered. He wasn't talking about anything big. Not yet, but the way he said it, like he was daring the world to take us on, made me want to be brave. We left the diner and walked along the beach, the sand cold under our boots, the waves a steady rhythm. He told me about the first time he kissed a boy in a Chicago alley with rain pouring down, and how it felt like freedom and fear all at once. I told him about the summer I was 16, when I'd watched a lifeguard named Jake and felt something I couldn't name, something I'd buried deep. "You're not alone, Caleb," he said, stopping to face me. The wind tugged at his hair, and his eyes were fierce, like he was willing me to believe him. "You don't have to be." I wanted to kiss him then, right there with the ocean as our witness, but fear stopped me. Not fear of him, but of what it would mean, of what I'd have to face if I let myself fall. Instead, I took his hand, tentative, like I was testing the water. His fingers curled around mine, strong and sure, and for a moment, the world was just us. But Haven's Cove doesn't let you forget. The next day, the whispers grew louder. Mrs. Carter, who'd known me since I was in diapers, gave me a cold look at the grocery store. Tommy and his buddies were at the bar, their laughter sharp as they watched me walk by. I felt like I was shrinking, like the town was closing in, trying to squeeze the truth out of me. Elliot noticed. We were at the lookout again, the same blanket spread over the truck's hood, when he turned to me. "You're scared," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Terrified, I admitted. "This place, it's all I know. If I lose it, what's left?" "You," he said simply. "And that's enough." He kissed me then, sudden and soft, his lips warm against the cool night air. It was like the world cracked open, like every part of me that I'd locked away came rushing back. I kissed him back, desperate, like I could pour all my fear and hope into that one moment. When we pulled apart, I was shaking, but not from cold. "I'm not like you," I said, my voice raw. "I'm not brave." "You're here," he said, his hand on my cheek. "That's braver than you think. But bravery has a cost." The next morning, someone slashed the tires on my truck. Scrawled across the windshield in marker was a single word: freak. I stood there, staring at it, my chest tight with rage and shame. Elliot found me, his face darkening as he saw the damage. "This is what you're afraid of?" he said, not a question. I nodded, unable to speak. He took my hand, his grip fierce. "You don't have to stay, Caleb. You don't have to let them win." But leaving wasn't simple. The garage was my dad's legacy, the only thing I had left of him. Mom's grave was here, her memory tied to every street. And yet, as I looked at Elliot, at the fire in his eyes, I wondered if staying was the real betrayal of myself, of the man I could be. We spent the day together, ignoring the stares, the whispers. He showed me his photos, each one a window into a world I'd never dared to dream of. There was a picture of two men dancing in a New Orleans street, their joy defiant. "That could be us," he said, his voice soft but sure. I wanted to believe him. But as we walked back to the diner, Tommy and his crew were waiting, their truck parked across the street. "You're making a mistake, Monroe," Tommy called out, his voice thick with menace. "This ain't your town anymore." Elliot stepped forward, his jaw set. "It's his town as much as yours." "Back off." Tommy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're gonna regret this, Drifter." They left, but the threat lingered, heavy as the fog rolling in from the sea. I looked at Elliot, his face set, his hand still in mine, and I knew I was at a crossroads. Stay and fight, or run and be free. The choice was tearing me apart, But with Elliot beside me, I felt something I hadn't in years: hope. The next few days were a blur of stolen moments and mounting tension. Elliot and I met at the diner, the lookout, the beach, anywhere we could carve out a piece of the world for ourselves. Each touch, each glance, felt like a rebellion against Havens Cove, against the life I'd been taught to live. But the town was closing in. The slashed tires were just the start. Graffiti appeared on the garage door, slurs I won't repeat, words meant to cut deep. Customers started canceling appointments, their excuses thin. Even Marge, who'd always been kind, looked at me with pity now, like I was a lost cause. Elliot was a flame in the dark, but even he couldn't burn away the fear. "We could leave," he said one night, his voice urgent as we sat in my truck, parked on a back road where no one would see us. "Just pack up and go? Anywhere. Everywhere." I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to. But the weight of Havens Cove, my dad's garage, my mom's memory, the life I'd built, was an anchor I couldn't cut loose. "I can't just run," I said, my voice breaking. "This is my home." "It's a cage," he shot back, his eyes blazing. "You're bigger than this place, Caleb. You're bigger than their hate." He was right, but right didn't make it easier. That night, I kissed him under the stars, harder than before, like I could hold on to him and let go of everything else. But when I got home, the reality of Havens Cove was waiting. A brick through my window, glass scattered across the living room floor. No note, but the message was clear: you don't belong. I didn't tell Elliot. I couldn't bear the thought of him seeing me break. Instead, I cleaned up the glass, taped cardboard over the window, and went to work like nothing had happened. But Pete, my coworker, saw through me. "You gotta be careful, man," he said, his voice low. "Tommy's not messing around. He's got half the town riled up." I nodded, but my mind was on Elliot. He was staying at a cheap motel on the edge of town, his motorcycle parked out front like a promise of escape. I found him there that evening, his camera in hand, sorting through photos on his laptop. "Look at this," he said, showing me a picture of us at the lookout, my face half-shadowed, his eyes bright with something like love. "This is who you are, Caleb. Not what they say you are." I kissed him then, desperate, like I could drown out the world. We fell onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and need. And for the first time, I let myself feel everything: fear, desire, hope. It was messy and perfect, and when we lay there afterward, his head on my chest, I thought maybe I could be brave enough for this. But the world doesn't wait for you to catch your breath. The next morning, I woke to a text from Pete: "Garage is trashed. Get here now." My heart sank as I drove over, Elliot beside me, his face grim. The garage was a wreck, tools scattered, windows smashed, oil cans spilled across the floor. And on the wall, in red spray paint, "Leave or else." Elliot's hand found mine, his grip tight. "This is it, Caleb. You stay, and they'll destroy you. Come with me. We'll figure it out together." I wanted to. I wanted to climb on his motorcycle and ride until Havens Cove was a speck in the rearview. But my dad's tools, my mom's memory, they were here, in this town, in this garage. "I can't," I said, my voice breaking. "I have to fight for this." Elliot's face fell, but he nodded. "Then I'll fight with you." We spent the day cleaning up, salvaging what we could. Pete helped, his silence heavy but loyal. Marge brought coffee and sandwiches, her eyes soft with something like pride. But the town was watching, and that night, Tommy and his crew came for us. They cornered us outside the diner, their faces twisted with hate. "You're done here, Monroe," Tommy said, his fists clenched. "And you, Drifter, get out before we make you." Elliot stepped in front of me, his voice steady. "You don't get to decide who stays." Tommy swung, and I don't know what happened next. Everything was a blur of fists and shouts, the taste of blood in my mouth. When it was over, Tommy and his guys were gone, and Elliot was holding me, his lips split, his eyes fierce. "You okay?" he asked, his voice shaking. I nodded, but I wasn't okay. I was terrified, not of Tommy, but of what I'd lose if I stayed. of what I'd lose if I left. I don't know how to do this, I said, my voice raw. I don't know how to be me. Elliot pulled me close, his breath warm against my neck. You're already doing it, Caleb. You're already enough. We went back to the motel, patched each other up, and talked until dawn. He told me about the life he wanted. Us, together, chasing stories and sunsets. I told him about the life I was afraid to leave, but also the life I was starting to want. By morning, I'd made a choice, but it wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. It was just mine. The sun rose over Havens Cove, painting the ocean gold, but the town felt different now, like a place I'd outgrown. I stood in the garage, my dad's tools in my hands, and felt the weight of every choice I'd ever made. Elliot was outside, leaning against his motorcycle, waiting for me to decide. Stay and fight, or leave and live. I thought about Mom, about the way she'd looked at me when I was 17 and scared, when I'd whispered the truth about who I was. You're my son, she'd said, and you're enough. I thought about Dad, who'd built this garage with his hands, who'd taught me to fix things, to keep going. And I thought about Elliot, who'd shown me what it meant to be free, to love without shame. I walked out to him, my heart pounding. I'm not ready to leave forever, I said, my voice steady. But I'm ready to try. With you. His smile was like the sunrise, warm and full of promise. Then let's go? Just for a while. See where the road takes us. We didn't leave right away. I had things to settle. Pete agreed to run the garage, to keep it going until I figured out what came next. Marge hugged me, her eyes wet, and told me to come back when I was ready. Even Mrs. Carter stopped by, her face softer than before. Be safe, Caleb, she said, and be happy. The town didn't change overnight. Tommy and his crew were still out there, their hate a poison that would take time to fade. But as I packed a bag and climbed onto Elliot's motorcycle, my arms around his waist, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't running away. I was running toward myself. We rode down Highway 101, the ocean on one side, the future on the other. The wind was sharp, the road endless, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Elliot's camera hung around his neck, ready to capture the story we were writing together. I didn't know where we'd end up, maybe New Orleans, maybe San Francisco, maybe nowhere at all, but I knew I was done hiding. Months later, I got a letter from Pete. The garage was doing okay, and the town was starting to talk less, to heal. Marge had put up a pride flag in the diner, a small act of defiance that made me smile. I wrote back, telling him I'd be home someday, but not yet. Not until I'd lived enough to know who I was outside of Havens Cove. Elliot and I found a rhythm, his photos, my stories, our love. We weren't perfect, but we were real. And every night, when I looked at him, I saw the road that led me to his heart, and I knew I'd made the right choice. Not to stay, not to leave, but to live, fully, bravely, as myself. The road stretched on, and so did we, two souls chasing freedom under an endless sky. And in every mile, I found a piece of me I'd thought was lost. I went for a drive to clear my head, but I found so much more. I found him. I found me. And I found a love worth fighting for.